What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I am setting up my fantasy cruncher for tonight's showdown slate between the Vikings and the Eagles. Unfortunately, we do have a smaller prize pool tonight with the two-game slate. We've got a larger two-game slate, but then we have smaller showdown prize pools. So a little bit of a disappointment there, but I'm still really excited about that. We still got 100K up top for this game, so should be a fun showdown slate. And I will show you how I'm setting things up. So I start, as always, I go to the columns. I have this quick view set up, and this is just something that I played around with the columns already and set them the way I like them, just the way I like to visualize this. It's really not important if you're not messing with projections or anything, but I'm going to click my quick view. And this is kind of how I rearrange the columns so that they look the way I want them to as I'm adjusting things in my fantasy cruncher. And then from here, I'm going to go to the advanced options and show you how I set this up. So most of the work that I do is just in two of these tabs. It's the general tab and then the groups tab. Actually, everything I do is in those two tabs. I don't use any of the other tabs when setting up my showdown information here. So in the general tab, first thing I do, okay, unique players per lineup, just one unique for me. I don't need to get too weird. If you're playing, 20 lineups or fewer, you might want to consider doing two there. But with the 150 set that I'm playing, I'm going to keep that at one and have some one-off lineups from each other. In the team salary field, I don't put anything in the minimum field for NFL Showdown. What I do is I do put a number in the maximum field, just because it's a way to make sure you're not duping as many other lineups. You can still dupe some, and plenty of people do leave a little bit of salary on the table. But I like to set a salary cap here just to ensure that most of my lineups are going to be duplicated fewer times. So if I win, I'll win more money. I'm not going to tell you exactly what I'm going to use. I don't know what I'm going to use yet, but for the sake of this exercise, I'm just going to leave $1,000 on the table. So I'm going to put in 49,000. I would recommend generally leaving at least $600 on the table, and I usually leave more than that. But if you leave at least 600, maybe you'll avoid some of the most duplicated lineups at least. All right, in the offensive players versus defense field, I'm always setting this to max 5 players. That means that I could have a lineup that is 5 players from one team and just the defense on the other team, and I'm totally fine with it if that happens. It doesn't happen for me very frequently anyway, but generally, if you do that, you're going to have a pretty unique lineup. Not a lot of people are using 5 players from one team against the defense from the other. You kind of need a game script where the other team doesn't really score many points, and the defense probably is going to need like at least a pick six, because if the team with 5 players is putting up enough points that it's a 5-1 lineup, that team's probably going to be putting up a lot of points. You're going to need the defense to score a touchdown most likely, and that team not to put up a lot of points. But I like to allow the possibility there. All right. I will keep this at 100%. So this is my global exposure setting. So that means that currently I have my exposure caps for all players at 100%. Typically, I do go into on the main screen, I go in and set a cap on my MVPs. And usually I set a universal cap, around 20%. And then I kind of play around with it a little bit and see if it's coming out the way I want. And if it's not, then maybe I'll adjust some players individually or set a different kind of cap. But usually 20% is where I'm going to start. Uh, Randomness, this all depends on how much control you want over everything. I put this at 50% generally. Sometimes I'll want a little bit more control and I'll lower that to 20%, 30%. The more randomness you have, the faster your crunches are going to go. 50% I think is a good general starting point. All right. Minimum projection included in calculation. What this is telling me is that any player with a projection below 3 fantasy points is not going to make it into my crunch. So there are two ways to go about this. You can either lower this number, assuming that you want players who project for fewer than 3 fantasy points, which I generally do. I like to play some guys who are just not going to get a ton of ownership. Usually those are players who don't project all that well. So you can either change this number lower so that you can get players that have a lower projection, or you can go in and bump those players' projections. Maybe I'll do a little bit of both. For this one, I'm just going to change this to 2, and then I'll see which players are being excluded and decide if I want to add them by boosting their projection above 2 fantasy points. All right, so that is everything that I'm going to do in the general tab. Guys, if you're a new Stokastic Plus Platinum or NFL user and want to give our NFL DFS tools a test run before purchasing, we have a great offer for you. Get access to all of our NFL DFS tools 100% free for 3 days. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools for NFL DFS that we have to offer on stokastic.com, including new tools such as our lineup generator and player compare, as well as player projections, ownership projections, top stacks, our boom bust tool, and so much more. Click the link in the description of this video below to join to activate your 3-day free trial now. Please note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included with this trial offer. I am, of course, showing you how to set up Fantasy Cruncher, so just keep that in mind that it's an add-on, but you can add it to this free trial. Now I'm going to go to the groups tab. All right, I'm going to create a group. We've got a unique situation here in that we have Jalen Hurts on the slate. Okay, so I'm going to add Jalen Hurts as my key player. Jalen Hurts in the captain spot as my key player. Now, if you've watched these videos before, you know that typically, so I'm going to add all of Jalen Hurts's receiving options from the Eagles. And I usually make a decision, okay, if any key player are used, then use at least how many from the group of receiving options. Jalen Hurts is unique in that he could put up a huge game just by rushing the ball. He had 800 rushing yards last year and 10 rushing touchdowns. That is elite production. So Jalen Hurts can put up a majority of his fantasy points on the ground. He could theoretically get there without bringing any pass catches along with him. So I think in the case of Jalen Hurts, I'm only going to apply the plus minus adjustments that I make to those individual players, which means that I'm not requiring at least one player from this group. If I'm only doing the apply plus minus adjustments, I don't need to get any player from the groups that I'm going to add. And I'll go ahead and add those players now so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, so I'm just going through and I'm adding every Eagles receiving option with a projection here, and I'll decide later if I actually want them in my crunch. But for this part, I'm just going to add every single one. And I think I'm going to include the running backs as well. I might go back later and change my mind about the running backs, but for now, I'm going to include them in that group. All right, so you don't include the captains in this case because Jalen Hurts is your captain. He is in the key spot, so Jalen Hurts in these lineups is in the captain spot. And now I'm just deciding how much of a boost do I want to give to his pass catchers. Since I'm not requiring that any of them be in there, maybe I'll give a little bit more boost than usual. And typically, I'm giving bigger boosts to players who have worse projections, because my concern with players like AJ Brown is that if he puts up a big enough game, he has a big salary and a fairly big projection. If he puts up a big enough game, it might be hard for Jalen Hurts to outscore him and Jalen Hurts to remain the optimal captain. So I still want AJ Brown in a lot of my lineups with Jalen Hurts as captain, but I'm giving bigger boosts to these other guys who are probably going to be a little bit more necessary in those lineups. And Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. I'll include those in those smaller boost kind of groups. And then running backs, I typically don't give a huge boost. All right, so that's good enough for me. These are not necessarily finalized. Who knows? This could be what I end up using, but I kind of play around with it as I run my crunches, see what's coming out, see if I'm getting the kinds of lineups that I like. But I think this is a good starting place. Very unique situation in that I'm not requiring any pass catcher to come along with Jalen Hurts in the captain spot, just because he really does have that upside to do most of the work by himself, especially against this Vikings rush defense, which is not as strong as its pass defense. All right, I'm going to name this group Hurts captain. And then I'll create a new group and show you the more typical would be what I'm doing with Kirk Cousins here. So I'm doing Kirk Cousins at captain as my key player. So for this group, it's what I want to do with lineups that have Kirk Cousins in the captain spot. I'm going to take the same approach as I did with Hurts, in that I am adding all of the Vikings receivers who have a projection. I think I'll include the running backs. All right, good enough there. Now with Kirk, I am not going to be clicking this only apply plus minus adjustments. Cousins does not run enough that I think he's going to do much on the ground. Most likely his fantasy production is going to be coming from receivers. So the real question is, do I want it to include at least one or at least two? Because generally, if if all of his production is going to just one receiver, that receiver is going to outscore him, because receivers score more points than quarterbacks per play, per receiving play. The receiver gets a point per reception. They also get more points per yard, more points per touchdown. So if all of his production is going to just one receiving option, it's going to be hard for Cousins to remain the optimal captain, particularly because he is more expensive than most of his receiving options. So it's a question of whether you want to do one or two here. I think I'll just leave it at one and then give boost to these players. And more likely, I'm going to be getting two players per lineup with Cousins at captain anyway, because of the boost that I give. It's a really tough call, though. I think two might actually be the right call here, because it's so unlikely that Cousins is going to put up fantasy points in any kind of numbers outside of throwing the ball. So I think I changed my mind. I'm going to change this to include at least two players from this group. And then I'm still going to give little boost to all the receivers. I don't even know if I probably don't need to give Justin Jefferson any kind of boost here, because he projects so well that he's going to make it into a lot of Kirk Cousins lineups, or a lot of lineups in general. And these running backs, I'm also maybe not going to give them any kind of boost. I want to include them in there, have the possibility of Kirk Cousins a captain, and hope for a passing touchdown to one of these running backs. But I'm also not going to give them a boost, because I think more likely I'm going to want one of his more standard receiving options. So I'm not going to give a boost to the running backs. I'm just going to say any key players used, at least two players from this group are now going to be in any lineup that I have with Kirk Cousins at captain. Hey guys, we've got a no-brainer offer for you today from BetMGM, and it ends tonight. So make sure you get on it today. Bet just $10, and if any team scores a touchdown tonight in either game, you'll win $200. It has to be a money line bet on either game. Bet $10, and if any team scores a touchdown tonight, which one of the teams tonight is going to score a touchdown, you'll win $200. We won't see many short things like this going forward, so I would recommend jumping on this offer now to win your free $200. Just click the link in the video description below to claim it. From there, what other groups do you want to make? There are a number of different groups you can make. Another one that I frequently make, would be Kirk Cousins in the flex spot. And it really varies for me how many groups I'm making from game to game. All right, Kirk Cousins in the flex spot as key player. So now the difference here is that I'm not just adding each of his receiving options in their flex roles. I also have to add each of them at captain if I want to give boost there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Captain Jefferson, Cook, Thielen. And you can think about how many of these players you actually want to include. You probably don't need to include every single one of these receiving options here, but I'm going to. All right. So now we've got all of the Vikings receiving options, at least theoretically. If I didn't miss any, we've got all of the Vikings receiving options, both in the flex spot and then also in the captain spot. And then I'm just going to go through and I'm going to say, actually, I'm going to start here. Do I want to require that I have one of these options in my lineup somewhere if I have Kirk Cousins in the flex spot? I think the answer is still probably yes. I don't know that I want lineups that have, a bunch of Eagles and then just Kirk Cousins as a one-off, just because of the same reason that I mentioned before, that the receiving options are going to score more points per receiving play, and Cousins doesn't do much on the ground. So I think that I do want to require at least one of these players in each lineup that has Cousins at flex. And then the question is, do you want to give any boosts here? I think I'm comfortable not giving any kind of a boost to any of these players and just saying make sure that maybe I will just the receivers, because I'd rather have a receiver in there with Jefferson than a running back. But I'll just give tiny little boosts. All right, good enough. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to crunch and I'm going to see what my lineups look like. And before I do it, like I mentioned before, so I'm going to click this captains tab up here. So I'm just looking at every player in the captain spot, and I'm going to set an exposure cap at 20%. And then I'm going to crunch using my projections. I change this down here to my projections. All right, so what do we think of this? Got Adam Thielen in the captain spot, correlated with Kirk Cousins, KJ Osborne. I like that there's only one Vikings receiver in this lineup outside of Captain Thielen. If there were more than one Vikings receiver, I don't love that quite as much, just because you really do need your captain to score a lot of fantasy points. And if there are three different Vikings receivers in the optimal, it's kind of a thin window for Kirk Cousins to not then become the optimal captain, although he does have a higher salary. So there is some window there. And then, of course, I've got Jalen Hurts in here with two receiving options. I like that. So that's a nicely correlated lineup. Looks really good. This one's similar. It's a very similar lineup. Devontae Smith, a captain. We've got Jalen Hurts correlated in there. Miles Sanders, Cousins with two receiving options. Looks good. Yeah, so far, all of these lineups are looking pretty good to me. I have no real issue with them. Here we've got Dallas Goedert at captain with no Jalen Hurts anywhere in the lineup. I'm okay with that because a lot of people don't like to do it. It's just a way to get unique, is kind of leaving out one of those main correlation pieces, and that's obviously a main correlation piece. We don't have Jalen Hurts anywhere in the lineup, but I'm okay with that. Kirk Cousins at captain with three receiving options from the Vikings. I like that. Probably don't want to have too many more than that because they do kind of all eat into each other's production, but I'm okay with having three. Yeah, so I think all these lineups are looking pretty good. I'm happy with the way they've turned out. One thing you may have noticed is I didn't make a group at all for Jalen Hurts in the flex, just because, as I said, the same reasoning for why I didn't require any pass catchers with Jalen Hurts as captain. Hurts can just do so much by himself. He could be optimal at captain without, or in the flex spot, sorry, without bringing anybody along with him. He can just get a lot of his production on the ground. And if the Eagles don't put up a lot of fantasy points, there's a good chance that Hurts will still put up a reasonable number and be the one Eagles player that you need in a lineup where, say, if it's a Vikings onslaught kind of a situation, you might want to have five Vikings in there and then just Hurts, and maybe he gets it by a little bit through the air and then a lot on the ground. There are plenty of ways for Cousins to be in that flex spot without bringing along any pass catches with him. So didn't even create a group for that one. I think that's about all I need to say about this. I guess we can look at some individual players really quickly and just kind of see who is and is not making it into my player pool. All right, so we're getting a good amount of both Hurts and Cousins. I'm happy with that. Are they also in captain spot used? Yeah, 20% Hurts. Where's Kirk Cousins? 18% Kirk Cousins. Yeah, so I'm getting plenty of the quarterbacks. All right, so not getting many of the running backs. And this is a situation similar to last week where I think I would give boost to some of these players just to make sure I get some of them. Usually I like to isolate some players who are not getting a ton of ownership, give them a little bit of a boost to make sure that I'm getting a little bit different and get different with my lineups and my player exposures. So I think that I will end up giving some boost to some of these players. Honestly, probably all of these guys are looking pretty low owned, with the exception of Delvin Cook. But Miles Sanders, yeah, maybe I'd go through and give little boosts to all these guys, uh, see what comes out, and then adjust. And I end up adjusting several times until I get to exposure levels that I like. Usually, I won't give any kind of a boost to players that have a 0 projection. I'm assuming if a player has a 0 projection, it's very unlikely they're going to have opportunity in this game. So typically, I'm just giving little boost to players that have some kind of projection in there. I'll have to look at Nuangu a little bit closer later. Yeah, Zach Pascal, not even making the player pool because he has a below 2 fantasy point projection. Currently, I don't include players below 2 fantasy points in my builds. So I'm just going to give him a little bit of a boost. Maybe Quez Watkins a little bit of a boost. And after I'm done with this, I'll crunch again. Probably AJ Brown a little of a boost. Honestly, though, I'm going to crunch it several times until I get to exposure levels that I like. Make sure I have a good number of these players that nobody else is playing. Get them into some of my lineups. Do I really want Ben Ellefson? I don't know that I do. He played a lot of snaps last week. I don't know that he's actually going to have that many chances to score. But for the sake of just showing you what I generally do, usually I'm just looking for anybody with a projection and making sure I get some in my lineups. Man, this is a tough slate for the Vikings defense. I love pairing defense against quarterback just as a way to get unique. Jalen Hurts just does not turn the ball over that much. He doesn't get sacked that much. It's a tough spot for the Vikings defense. I'm still probably going to do it. I'm still probably going to try to be close to or above the field with these defenses, just as a way to get a little bit unique in my builds, just because I know that a lot of people aren't going to play these defenses and particularly aren't going to play them against the opposing offense. But I'm not super confident in this one because it is a tough spot, but maybe I'll end up giving slight projection boost here to make sure I get a little bit more. I'm giving the Eagles a slightly lower projection boost, so they have a lower projection because they cost less, and I'd like to get a similar amount of both. And then I'll crunch again, and I'll see what comes out, and then I'll do the same thing over again. Looks like I'm getting a ton of Jack Stoll. I probably don't want 24%, 23% Jack Stoll in my lineups. I am not going to give him that boost that I have in there for him currently. I'll lower this. Maybe I want to get close to the field, maybe even a little bit above the field, but it's not a high confidence play. He's not something that I want in 23% of my lineups. I know that much, so I will have to keep going, adjusting, making sure I'm getting to exposure levels that I'm comfortable with each player, and then I'll just run it out there. All right, guys, that'll do it for this video. Thanks for watching.